Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Wednesday. Are you ready to mark this down? I usually don't stop you at this point, but it is Wednesday, December 18th, 2019. It is an historic day. I was going to say an historical day. I'm just glad I said an historic day. It is Impeachment Day, I-Day, if you want to term it that way. The third president ever in our history set to be impeached today. I guess there's some chance that they screw with things so badly that they end up delaying the vote until tomorrow. But today's the day that impeachment heads to the House floor. Yesterday they spent all day in the Rules Committee markup for it. That would have been worth breaking in with a live broadcast to cover for you. But of course we were getting the roof repaired here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, and they actually did, nail the shingles on yesterday. Not that they did it at the time they were supposed to have done it, which actually means we could have done the show live yesterday. There wouldn't have been no disruption, but how were we to know that things were going to be delayed until the afternoon? In the meantime, let's see, while they were working on things yesterday, they got through the Rules Committee. It took much longer than anybody really thought it was going to. And if the Republicans' conduct at the committee markup in the Judiciary Committee is any indication of how they plan to handle things going forward and into today, it is entirely possible they may attempt to push things so late that they vote on adopting the articles of impeachment late at night, and then the Republicans can say, aha, Democrats were so ashamed of what they were doing that they did their voting in the dead of night. This was what they were aiming for, I believe, in the Judiciary Committee. Jerry Nadler saw it coming and gavelled proceedings to a close about 11 o'clock that night that they were working on the markup, and said, well, we'll hold the vote tomorrow, first thing in the morning, where everyone can see it. First order of business during the business day here on the East Coast. It'll be live on C-SPAN and maybe some of the networks, and we'll let everybody see what we're doing. We'll be totally transparent about it. And that drove the Republicans up a very different wall, and they said, how dare you delay things? You said you were going to have the vote today, and now you're dragging it out for television ratings. So they have it, all set up so that they can criticize you coming and going. We'll see whether it works. We'll see whether they can keep the House proceedings on track today. I mean, there's nothing within the rules that should allow them to delay things that long, but that just means they'll go outside of the rules to try to delay things and keep things going until late at night. And we'll see what happens. There is another day coming after today. It was known as Thursday previously, and I guess from henceforth we will end up calling it Impeachment Day if we push it back. So mark it in pencil on your calendars then, that December 18th, 2019, the third president of the United States ever to be impeached while in office, and we may well one day get to the impeachment of a president once they are out of office. That's still possible even with this president. So put it down in pencil, and at worst, you just end up moving it over one day and doing it as December 19th. So don't burn it in your brain or anything. Anyway, we're ready to roll for the day. Daily Coast Radio is live now, we are told, all the way from one of the sites of many spontaneous, well-coordinated, but seemingly spontaneous impeachment demonstrations, Portland, Maine. And we got some pictures via the Twitter machine yesterday that indicate that Bill was on hand for that, but he's letting you know that Daily Coast Radio is live now. And in a moment of unfortunate timing, he points out, today's impeachment vote is going to blow the roof off this place one freaking day after we just got it fixed. And that is unfortunate, isn't it? Well, we haven't repaired the drywall damage yet, and so we're still ready for the house to be torn apart at any given moment. I don't know whether that drywall repair, they're probably going to try and schedule it for next Tuesday and then the Tuesday after that, but Next Tuesday, I guess, brings us to Christmas Eve, which of course means that the Tuesday after that, because this is the way calendars work, would be New Year's Eve. Not that a 9 to 11 a.m. show should be affected by either, but who knows? We may be celebrating. Who knows? Who knows what we're celebrating? We might start celebrating early. It might be Trump's resignation. Yeah, right. Not that he's capable of that kind of shame. And, there's any number of things that can get in the way, of course. So, with that in mind, let's start rolling. Greg has been collecting his raft of stories and has just sent them through this morning. We could cover the news. We could read from Trump's 6-page Saddam Hussein letter that he sent yesterday, and I've been thinking more and more about Saddam Hussein. Everything he said, and if you remember the video of him in court insisting that his whole trial, which led to his execution, by the way, was illegitimate and unfounded in law or the country's constitution or in jurisprudence from anywhere in human history, it was very familiar. You saw it again yesterday in this letter that was released. I know part of Greg's collection, or certainly part of his commentary yesterday when we weren't on the air together, was about the failure once again of the American media to actually portray this letter as what it was, and complete evidence of his complete unglued demeanor, if you can even call that a demeanor. He's just come apart, and instead we were treated to headlines like fiery, that he was, so somebody even said he was resilient, which is amazing because he was coming apart at the seams, which is actually the opposite of resiliency. But
Ashley Parker, Washington Post.
Yeah, and she's usually, not that horrible about these things. But maybe she didn't write the headline. Maybe she did. What the hell? Let's blame her for it and we'll see what happens. We'll see if she complains to us about our poor journalism skills. Anyway, it was a lousy afternoon for watching the newspapers fall apart and trying to normalize what had happened in this letter. That's really it's super sad. You know what I'm saying? All right. Greg, hi, how you doing? What's the weather like up there?
I'm fine. How's McKinsey doing on your house again? So a little of this, a little of that?
Yes, they're consulting beautifully on the progress in the house. It's dry. That's good, and give the ceiling time to dry out a little bit.
That's good. Yeah. So Jim Clyburn was on Morning Joe this morning pointing out that everybody really needs to read the letter because that's basically going to be the roadmap to his reelection as far as how he runs his campaign.
That's a good point.
Right? And yes. Claire McCaskill said, well, it shows he's crazy. And Clyburn just, I'm thinking to myself, he just made a point. Why don't you listen to the man? Okay, you can look at it and say, yes, it's one of those so damn insane letters, as you pointed out this morning. But Peter Alexander, for example, just tweeted, White House source highlights key line that Trump diatribe about the great damage and hurt you've inflicted on wonderful and loving members of my family.
And crappy members as well.
Well, but Alexander points out this is a strong reminder how Trump sees impeachment as an attack on him personally rather than a judgment on his actions as president, because he can't distinguish, the state is me.
Well, he does suck personally.
And even his children are just little mini Trumps.
Yeah.
They're not like they're separate people. Everything is about him. The world is about him. And so if you say something bad about a policy, you're personally insulting him. And therefore he has to take you out. And the trouble is he's now in a situation where his usual tactics, hiring Michael Cohen or bribing Nancy Pelosi, these things are not working. They're not available to him.
Okay, well,
so now he's got to have to suffer the consequences. He never does that. He's never done that in his life. So he's having a little bit of a difficult time with it. And that's really the genesis of the letter. That's how it should have been handled. Incohate letter shows Trump angst behind the scenes or just below the surface rather than fiery Trump writes scathing letter. That's ridiculous. Scathing. It was written by Stephen Miller, and it had all sorts of misspellings. It was terrible.
Did it have misspellings? I don't think I noticed that quite as much. I mean,
well, not that it mattered. That wasn't the point.
No,
but and then, of course, all of the stories leaked right after. Well, the White House lawyers didn't see it. I had nothing to do with it. He didn't show it to me.
Right. Damn straight. Otherwise, he'd be disbarred.
He's your boss. You chose to work there. Don't give me that
Yeah,
crap.
I mean, I don't
I'm
feel
not
bad
interested.
about it. Right. Yeah, I had some thoughts about whether or not Stephen Miller had a hand in it. It seems he must have. I mean, I don't think Trump can write anything that long by himself entirely, but I have a feeling that it was more like him ranting and saying, Stephen, write this down. And then Miller kind of added some, a little thesaurus work and threw in a couple flourishes here and there that don't usually occur to Trump. But there was definitely some 100% pure, uncut Trump coming through in that letter.
Yeah. So let's step back and look big picture here, okay? Because today's impeachment day, and obviously that's the news, and it doesn't matter anything else. That's what's dominating everything. And Simon Rosenberg had a really nice tweet storm this morning, which I very much appreciate.
Yes.
Because it was really annoying listening to all of the pundits say, oh, look, Trump went up 0.5% in the polls. This means he's going to be reelected. We heard that
the letter was effective
all day yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, this impeachment's going to be so bad for Democrats. So let's look at big picture here.
All right.
Okay. His first tweet: GOP is not winning the impeachment argument, according to Fox News and ABC Washington Post polling. 22% agree there shouldn't be witnesses.
Yeah,
right?
know how
71% of the public wants the Senate to bring fact witnesses.
Yes.
They want to hear from Mulvaney and Giuliani. Now,
Right.
a lot of his supporters think it'll be exculpatory. Fine, bring them.
Yeah, it's criminals that say no witnesses.
Only.
And Abby. Who,
Abby gets upset at that.
Yeah, well, she doesn't want witnesses. I don't really know why she objects, but, well, we'll have her on the program later and ask her.
Well, it's really
So
icy
she's
here.
trying.
What's happening is there's a sand truck going by on the street, and Abby really gets upset when you don't make a prior appointment with her.
I have a feeling even a prior appointment wouldn't work. But okay. We can live with this. The sand truck, it has to happen.
So 37% say Trump didn't commit bribery. 38%
They're
say
wrong.
Trump didn't abuse his office.
And they're wrong, too.
38% say House acted unfairly. 39% say Trump didn't improperly pressure Ukraine.
Okay.
And it's 50 to 49 remove. I mean, in other words,
Yes.
the majority of the public thinks Trump did it.
I agree. They did.
And
Right.
as a matter of fact, that is
Exactly.
the title
Oh.
of today's impeachment piece from 538. It's called "Most Americans Think There's Enough Evidence to Impeach Trump."
Did the sand truck break down on your street, or just
No, she's having a bit of a conniption here.
okay?
In fact, I think I'll go take care of it. I'll be right back.
Oh,
But,
all right. Well,
most Americans, there she is. She's all calmed down now.
Oh, okay.
Most Americans think there's enough evidence to impeach Trump is the title
Yes.
of that particular piece. And basically, they're doing their own polling through Ipsos and finding that the people who said yes, refusal to cooperate with impeachment inquiry and efforts to block witnesses from complying with subpoenas. Do you think there's enough evidence to impeach President Trump on the following matters? The refusal to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry, yes, 54.3% say that's enough to impeach. Actions regarding Ukraine, yes, 53% say so. Financial conflicts of interest, no. 44% say it's enough to impeach. And Russian interference in 2016, as outlined in the Mueller report, no, 42.7%. So the point there is focusing on Ukraine and making that the focus for impeachment has worked to the extent that Democrats can focus the message amongst people. You might argue, well, had they focused on Mueller, maybe those numbers would have been higher. But they are what they are. The majority of Americans think that what Trump did is worth impeaching, specifically actions regarding Ukraine and blocking Congress. And by the way, those are the two articles of impeachment. So GOP is not winning the impeachment argument. Democrats are. That's number one. Number two, Trump is not winning the 2020 election. That's the other thing. Oh, my gosh, look at this. His 538 average has gone up to 43.5. That means he's going to be reelected. That was the other stuff that was highly annoying yesterday. It's already starting to go down. I mean, it was a blip. And again, as I've argued on this show, some of it might well be just Republicans rallying around a beleaguered president who happens to be in the process of being impeached. And as of tomorrow, it's going to be Republicans rallying around a beleaguered impeached president.
Yes. So it would seem.
So Trump not winning the election. Why do we say that? By Trump campaign's own admission in this Monica Alba piece for First Read, they've lost 9 million voters, 15% of the 2016 vote. This puts Trump at 40 to 41 for 2020, a Democrat landslide territory. Trump campaign looks to re-energize disengagers for 2020, says the article. Even with impeachment looming, the president's team is concerned about luring back 2016 supporters who have been sidelined. It just goes on to say that they've got their own issues. It's always about, oh, well, how will Democrats do this? And how can they manage that? And who's on the stage? And what if they don't have these voters? Republicans have their own issues. And it's not like every single Trump voter in 2016 has stuck with him to the point that, absolutely they will not budge. As a matter of fact, Civics, the polling outfit that works with Daily Kos, did their own roundup. And listen to these numbers. Opposition to Trump is much firmer than support. New poll.
Yes.
Support Trump, almost nothing could change my mind, 30%. Oppose Trump, almost nothing could change that, 48%.
That's larger.
Support Trump, but open to changing mind, 14. Oppose Trump, open to changing mind, 5.
Yeah.
Okay?
Those are bad.
Republicans, 67% say they support President Trump, and there's nothing that could change that. But 22% of Republicans say that although they support Trump right now, they're open to changing their mind if things change later. That's who this impeachment is aimed at.
Okay, I'll take it.
So,
wow.
so there's also
Lose my voice, though.
Huffington Post did a roundup of all the latest polling on impeachment, finding that in their YouGov polling, most Americans say they've made up their mind. There hasn't been that much change. And I'll give you the reference. But if you look at the graph that accompanies the reference, lately, over the past week or so, actually, support for impeachment has grown.
They're watering it every day.
Watering it every day. So there's that impeachment in green. You can see that for yourself. So that's the background to Simon Rosenberg's comment. Comment number 3, McConnell's hand is weaker than it appears. 3-seat majority more than tenuous than understood. Republican incumbents in danger in Arizona, Colorado, Maine, and North Carolina. As a matter of fact, Susan Collins decided today was a good day to do a news dump and say she's running for re-election. Not that we didn't expect that, but, there's stuff going on today that may make us not pay attention to that. And now she's going to have to be on the record in a month or so as to how she's voting. Okay. Maine is somebody who tends to vote for Democrats these days, so we shall see. Not like Jared Golden in Maine 2, who's decided to split his impeachment vote. Yes on 1, no on 2. I would have thought it would have been no on 1, yes on 2. But, hey, whatever. He's managed to get everybody in his district angry with him. So good luck with that.
They should split their electoral vote.
If the Democrats win the presidency, 50-50 Senate makes McConnell minority leader, by the way. Just a reminder. Now, Trump is not definitively ahead in a single 2020 battleground state. Biden versus Trump using right-leaning, real clear politics numbers. Biden beating Trump outside the margin of error in Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Although Wisconsin is very close. We know that from the best polling in Wisconsin, MU Law poll. And Wisconsin will remain close. States within the margin of error, Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Texas. If Arizona, Florida, and Texas, well, Florida is going to be a toss-up. Florida is going to come down to a 1% win or loss every year because it always does. But Arizona and Texas, if they're toss-ups, that's not good for Republicans. Also, new Trump-Russia 2020 scandal is going to make any claims to Trump innocence exoneration absurd. Not only did he cheat again in 2019, he and his team are under serious criminal investigation, which will last through the 2020 elections. Rudy Giuliani's stuff is subject to criminal investigation, and that won't be going away.
We hope not.
Right? And despite Trumpian Fox right-wing noise machine, tens of millions of dollars in ads, Trump GOP entered the next phase of impeachment battle far weaker than understood. The House Intelligence Committee Chairman Schiff says whatever the Senate does is merit in what we do today to tell the rest of the world we're a functioning democracy. Now, the Dems are prevailing in this fight because basically it's a just cause. And he's guilty.
Yes.
So when you consider all of that, it's just hard to put oh my gosh, the DC pundits spoke to Republicans. Republicans are all confident that they're doing the right thing and they're going to win. Well, that's always the case. Even when Democrats win, we're antsy about it. We're worried. That's us. It's in our DNA. Republicans are totally confident as they walk off the cliff and lose. We saw that in 2018. And so, I still think that were it not for Comey, we would have seen it in 2016, but that's a different story. We haven't even picked a candidate yet, and Trump is in serious trouble for 2020. There is a path for him to win. That's not what I'm saying. But if somebody says, look, here's a plausible way that Trump could win because you don't need 50% of the vote with our electoral college to get a win, this is true. And if somebody writes an article that says Trump could win and here's how, this is also true. But interpreting those as proof that he's winning, going to win, or at this point is the favorite is bullshit.
Nah, true. I mean,
right? It's a 50-50 race at best for Trump. And there's a lot of signs that say he's in a lot more trouble than that.
Yes. I mean, I think I get where people are coming from. Sometimes when you're preparing an article like this and you can't believe that there's any chance in the world that such an incompetent, lying son of a bitch would win.
Yeah, but that's why what Jim
realize,
Clyburn said is so much more important than what Claire McCaskill said. If that's the point, totally, right? Clyburn says, look at this letter. This is how they're going to use it as a roadmap for re-election. And McCaskill says, I'm just dismissing it because he's crazy. Clyburn's right. McCaskill's wrong. But then again, he's still in Congress. She's not. I would just point that out.
That's true. Good point. By the way, this just in, according to The Hill, the Republicans have begun their impeachment delay tactics by immediately going to a motion to adjourn.
Oh, you're kidding. Who could have seen that coming? Can you believe it? Was it Doug Collins?
I feel like they'll lose this motion, but, it will take us at a minimum 15 minutes to find out how many Democrats there are in the House of Representatives versus how many Republicans.
Right. And, part of these tactics, of course, the way that they've decided the rules are important, is that they're going to have statements, then they're going to have 6 hours of debate each side, and then according to the clock and the calendar, which is Doug Collins' favorite saying, that means they should have a vote tonight around 7:30. And Republicans will do their best to delay that so that the vote's at 2 a.m.
Yes, they have many reasons to want to do that, including the fact that apparently Trump, the plan is for Trump to be on stage at a rally, I think in Michigan, at the time of the
7:30,
vote.
Right, at the time of the vote.
So that's kind of fun.
The other side of the coin is that according to the rules, and you can help me with this, because Trump is being impeached,
yes,
he and Mike Pence are allowed on the floor of the House this morning.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe.
I saw that tweeted out. So he could show up and say, the whole thing is a sham.
I guess
and
he
stop
could.
The proceedings.
Or hit him with the mace.
Fancy camera work, watching him enter the chamber.
They should do that.
But that's all possible. These are all possibilities, not just the one in Michigan. Where he's doing a rally.
I'm unsure about that. I mean, he certainly has the ability to show up on the Senate floor during the trial. I'm not 100% sure he has a chance to sign up or to walk onto the floor of the House for this, but, I'd love to see.
Hey, I thought I'd ask an expert. You don't have to answer that right now, but we'll figure that out by tomorrow.
That doesn't come up a lot.
Yeah. I don't know how many times, perhaps 2 times in my lifetime.
Well, yeah.
Maybe a third.
This is the third impeachment in history. They're actually holding a vote on.
Yeah, well, I count Nixon. I don't count Andrew Johnson because
he wouldn't have had that opportunity because they didn't have that floor vote. So this would be only the third time that this would present itself as a question, whether the president is allowed on the floor during an impeachment vote in the House. By the way, everyone knows that fact, I think, and everyone knows the asterisk about Nixon. But of course, Nixon didn't get it, and that's important to the next point. This is the first time a Republican has ever been impeached. I just want to point that out. I mean, I know that everyone knows that in the back of their minds, but no one has ever stopped and thought about this. For all the screaming and crying and how unfair and partisan impeachment is, they've never impeached a Republican, and they've been among the worst presidents we've had, the most outrageous in terms of ignoring the law and the Constitution. two impeachments that they've got on the record, both Democrats. And, of course, we all remember from recent memory what Bill Clinton was really being impeached about, and that made no sense then and makes even less now by comparison. But for all the crying they've done, no one has ever bothered to impeach a Republican before.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's interesting. The first time for all their law breaking that somebody's really going to actually face the music here.
Right. So, again, an interesting twist on this discussion is this article in Politico. Trump invokes Kavanaugh to fight impeachment. Instead of fretting about being dealt a bad hand, the president's reelection campaign is trying to weaponize impeachment to boost its messaging and fundraising. So these little blips that we're seeing in support in the polls may well be, again, as we've talked about, the rallying effect from dumping millions of dollars of ads into the president's reelect. And the good news is, if this is all you get out of it, I don't know how effective that effort's going to be.
All right. Well, me neither.
Recent impeachment ads run by the Trump campaign have reprised themes of the Kavanaugh confirmation battle from the language itself, witch hunt.
Kavanaugh.
Actually, the mayor of Salem, Massachusetts, had to come on and lecture people about what witch hunts actually are, to the assertion that congressional Democratic leaders are trying to brainwash the American people, as one recent Facebook ad declared. And Brad Parscale says, this lit up our base, lit up the people that are supporters. They're frustrated, they're upset, and that motivates voters. Well, it motivates their voters, but it also motivates our voters, which is how we won in 2018.
Yeah, all right. Well, I hope we can repeat that phenomenon, but they seem to be pinning an awful lot to the idea of energizing their voters with the most negative possible story for their candidate. I don't know how that's going to play out. All right. Well, we'll be back in 2 minutes, and hopefully in the next 2 minutes we'll find out. And Trump will either be president or not when we come back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have the rule book out. I'll do this later. We'll continue on with Greg's segment here. I can't just interrupt your segment to look through the index of the Jefferson's Manual here, but I'll see if I can find anything about that. Hour 2 of the show will be me turning pages in the rule book and saying, no, that's not it. No. But for now, we have actual news we'll continue with. What else might you want to talk about, if anything?
Well, I think that's the main thing.
Okay. Never mind.
What else do we have today? We have
pictures of Oliver Willis's dog. That's always good news.
It's always good. No, we have all of the different vulnerable Democrats who, of course, were agonizing over impeachment, pretty much all deciding that, no, they're going to vote on impeachment in a positive way with the Democrats. And there's always Jared Golden, who decided that he's going to vote yes on Article 1.
Yeah, which one is that? That's
1 is abuse of power, and Article 2 is obstruction of Congress.
Okay, so he's
now Article 2 is the slam dunk. Even conservatives understand why you might do that. Of course, he's a no on that. Article 1 is the tricky one because you have to accept, for example, that even without the fact witnesses that the Trump administration is blocking, there's enough information there. Now, the 600 and something page report from the Judiciary Committee suggests bribery and other crimes, and they note where and how.
Yes.
But I would have thought if you're going to split them, you would have voted no on 1 and yes on 2.
Yeah, you're right. I would have thought that would have been the easier call for a Republican looking to split the baby, but maybe he hasn't read them.
He was the other way. So he managed to get everybody in his district to hate him, so we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, Washington Post runs a big story on Elaine Luria from Virginia, too, and Abigail Spanberger. And they're, of course, both doing it. And Elise Slotnick had a televised town hall explaining to her constituents in Michigan why she was voting for impeachment. That's all good. And so, I think that on the whole, all of the, oh my gosh, Dems are wavering stories kind of disappeared because, they weren't true.
It was very hard to find data for them.
But, you write them anyway, just like, Trump's going to win. It's just nonsense.
Sure.
It's a reflex of, okay, now it's time for one of these stories.
I guess they get embarrassed occasionally and stop doing these things. I don't know.
No, you could. Kyle Kondik points out, I don't know what the optimal rollout for Jeff Van Drew would have been here, but I don't think we've seen this is it. Jeff Van Drew said his staff were told to quit his office or, quote, they wouldn't work again, end quote. He declined to reveal the basis for the claim. He also declined to confirm widespread reporting he's about to switch parties.
Yeah.
Right. But the funny thing is, this is New Jersey.
That is hilarious.
Right. And so the people in New Jersey, the Democrats, are saying, let me explain something to you. Let me tell you about all the times Jeff Van Drew trashed Trump, even yesterday, telling everybody what a big jerk he was. He wants to join that party and get Republican votes. Let's tell you what he said about Trump behind closed doors as of an hour ago. And so all those leaks are all of a sudden magically starting to come out for some reason.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll believe them. I mean, they are pretty good at selective belief, I suppose, and Trump too.
We'll see. But he
does hate that.
I'm just saying that the whole Jeff Van Drew switches parties wasn't exactly smooth. It's not like John McCain voting thumbs down at the last minute. It's not like Jeff Van Drew during the vote getting up and walking across the aisle like they did in England.
Yes, that would have been much more dramatic.
That would have been much more dramatic, but no, that's not what they did.
I imagine switching parties, so even not in dramatic fashion, but announcing or making clear that it's possible that you could change parties, and then the follow-up is this 6-page letter. Like, you would switch parties for that? Wow.
Yeah, exactly. To be in the minority.
Yeah, right. So I'm going to become powerless and align myself with crazy Uncle Grandpa over here.
Right. Okay. New Military Times poll, the one we've been waiting for. It's about a month late.
Really?
Is out yesterday.
Well, you know how the military is, always running late.
Yeah, Trump has a 42% approval in the latest poll, and that's the lowest mark in the survey since being elected president. 50% of troops said they had an unfavorable view of him.
Okay.
46-37 positive negative in November of 2016. That's still a higher approval rating than former President Barack Obama got when he left office in January 2017. But,
from the military,
for everybody expecting that the military was going to be backing Trump, not according to this poll. Very favorable, 24.3. Very unfavorable, 45.1. And again, polls that look at intensity find on the average, something like 2-1. Democrats are much more against Trump than the base is for him in the sense of percentage numbers. In other words, if you're looking at very unfavorable, very favorable, that generally favors Democrats, just like it does in this Military Times poll. So just reflecting the fact that the military is just like the rest of the country in this regard.
All right. Well, it should be. You'd think it would be a little reflective of the country.
Well, he says his military, his generals, his this, his that.
Right.
I'm just saying that's not how they feel.
Well, he knows better than them anyway.
I know that's a weird.
Yeah, can you handle that? He's lying to you.
Yeah.
Can you process that, man?
Exactly.
All right. Well, I wonder whether any more delaying tactics are happening. I'd be curious to know which ones they're using on the House floor this morning.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
They're probably still playing
so that's basically the news for today. It's going to be impeachment. It's going to be historic. It's going to be boring. It's going to be tedious. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be all of those things. Of course, it depends who's speaking.
Well, true. And
I wonder if in a solemn occasion like this, Jim Jordan will wear a jacket.
Yeah, that's true. I think I can't recall whether I have tracked whether he wears a jacket when he's on the floor voting. Usually, I think that there is a dress code on House floor.
Right?
Tie may all be it. I don't know whether that they still would require the jacket, and they sometimes vary these things when they get weirdo, eccentric members that dress.
Yeah, I want to see if Tom Cole and Mark Meadows wear tracksuit, and of course Jeff Van Drew will do something with sequins.
Yeah, if there's somebody on the floor wearing a tracksuit, there's a serious breach of security. It's probably Lev Parnas for one thing, and should get rid of him. But you know how those mobsters love their tracksuits.
I say that because Jeff Van Drew, we talked about this on the show, wears weird stuff.
He does. He doesn't tend toward the tracksuit thing, but that would be an interesting. I would love to see him wear a tracksuit with a pocket square, if that's possible.
Yeah. Huh. Very, very interesting.
He's got some weird. He loves the pocket squares. He thinks he's nattily dressed when he's doing that.
Right. Anyway,
yes.
That's the story. So Abby's quiet now, and I think what we'll do is I'll shut down my portion of the show for now and be back tomorrow, and we'll talk about everything that happened and reaction to it. And, we'll see whether this mini boomlet of, oh, my God, Trump's going to win because of this will last more than a couple of hours. I don't think it will.
Well, eventually they'll get around to doing the vote, and I think that'll probably drive that down. But
I think that's what's going to be driving the news, and then it'll be people's reaction to the vote, which is going to be a different thing altogether.
Right. So, good day to buy a diner.
And if the pundits actually go out and talk to people, they just might be surprised.
All right. Well, they could, unless they go only to breakfast at diners. In which case, they might not be surprised.
And talk to each other.
Right. Yeah.
All righty. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Very good. We'll see if the president has been impeached when we speak again.
Yep. Take care.
Excellent. I will. I'll keep one eye on the floor. I really won't, but I'll keep one eye on people who are keeping both eyes on the floor, but also somehow typing on Twitter just to let us know what's going on. I imagine they're probably still in the motion to adjourn vote, but I'm not sure about that. That's something they could. I mean, really, if you really wanted to disrupt things, you could just make motions to adjourn all day long until they gavel you out of order and kick you out. And I mean, that might not be a terrible way to go for them, especially if some of them were expelled for the day and prohibited from speaking. They could make a big protest march about, and you know how they love to do it over on the Republican side, putting tape over their mouths and getting their pictures taken. All right, let's see. Well, where should we turn for our next comments on this? By the way, I guess we ought to spend some time. Should we? Maybe we shouldn't spend any time on the letter, because I imagine you all would have read it by now. Usually, hearing that the President of the United States has sent a 6-page letter addressed to the Speaker of the House means people won't read it. But I think everybody saw there was so much commentary on how crazy the damn thing was. I think everybody took some time. And it's easy reading. I will say that. It goes very quickly. And I have already heard at least one Trump impersonator comedian read the letter aloud, and I will say I don't know if I agree that the sound of the voice is really all that great, but it's the ad-libbing as Trump, which is funny, and particularly I got a good laugh out of I only listened to the beginning, but what's the name of the guy? I can't remember his name, and he's got an outrageous surname, and it would be difficult for me to read aloud, but would be, for those of you familiar with his work and who've seen the show that he's put on Comedy Central, the name would be second nature because you've heard it pronounced, but you know the guy I'm talking about. He does a very interesting interpretation, and when he's reading the address of the letter aloud, as he does, because of course Trump, was very formal, and he wrote the letter and gave an address and everything, and reading aloud Washington, D.C., as he read it, Washington Dick, which I thought was probably about where Trump would come down in this sort of reading aloud for all this. All right. I mean, I don't know what to do about the letter itself. I do feel like it deserves some attention, but I'm pretty sure you've probably all read it. There's some great call-outs in it and passages in it that are just outrageously juvenile. And again, I guess my thinking on this is I think he dictated the bulk of the letter and the feeling of the letter, and I think that it was then embellished by White House staff. And although I think of Stephen Miller as being more capable than this in terms of speech writing, because he was, after all, Jeff Sessions' speechwriter in the Senate. And it's not that Jeff Sessions became known for speaking in a rambling and illiterate style while he was in the Senate. I mean, he was racist, but not rambling and illiterate in this way. But Miller is usually a little bit more skilled at this stuff. But when he has taken over and grabbed the steering wheel and written more expansive policy pieces, like for instance when he and Bannon would team up to draft the administration's early executive orders, it was very clear that he really just was utterly unfamiliar with government document and policy making and legalistic style. And he wrote executive orders out in the style that a right-wing extremist conspiracy theorist might in fact write an executive order. I hereby order all duly elected and appointed officials in the whole entire United States government to, just do this damn thing. And, he's got no understanding of the kind of language that you would use to affect something like this. And so, it's entirely possible, though he's more literate than Donald Trump, it may be that he, in fact, had a big hand in writing this thing out. Although the usual racism that is the hallmark of his writing was missing, but it just wasn't a racial topic, I guess. So maybe that's the reason for it. All right, let me see. Let's switch over to Pocket and to the Twitter feed and see what is available to us besides the letter itself. As entertaining as it might be to read some of it, I think it would be duplicative work. Let's see. Oh, yes, I did say it might be of some interest for us to look and see whether there's any indication of any rules about access to the floor for the president during the House's impeachment vote. That would be somewhat surprising to me, although the president would clearly have an interest in such a thing. It feels like it would be, it feels counter to the spirit of the design of the process. Remember, of course, that the closest analogy, not that Republicans have grasped this or allowed themselves to grasp this or whatever, but the House seems to be the best analogy to a recognizable criminal proceeding is that the House acts as grand jury. And grand jury procedure, of course, for the most part, is secret, and the defendant would have no right to barge in on the grand jury in the middle of its deliberations with respect to whether or not they're going to hand down an indictment. So, that's not a perfect analogy, but it explains why it would feel off. Anyway, I have, as you know, almost always handy, my big giant paperback copy of the Constitution, Jefferson's Manual, and the Rules of the House, all compiled in one handy volume, although mine is at this point a little bit aged, one might say. It comes from the 108th Congress, so that's some time ago. 2005 is the print date on this, but it will have held true, I think, with respect to the rules on impeachment. And now you have to just go to the index here and see. It might actually call something out right away. And let's say impeachment, civil officers removable by. There's notes on who is a civil officer, the nature of impeachable offenses, later impeachment inquiries, cases of impeachment not to be tried by jury, but by the Senate, of course. House having the sole power of impeachment, Senate alone trying impeachment. This is all familiar from the Constitution. Let's see. president not to pardon in cases of impeachment. I always found that one to be fun and fertile grounds for purposefully misinterpreting the rules on that one. I believe what they mean here is the president is not to pardon people from impeachment. That is, if someone other than the president of the United States is being impeached, federal judge, vice president, what have you, you can't pardon an impeachment because that, of course, is not a criminal proceeding. It's not a courtroom proceeding either. Presumably, I guess the assumption is that impeachment reaches only Article 3 proceedings, not Article 1 proceedings. However, it is stated in a way that would be subject to misinterpretation, certainly would be subject to misinterpretation by Republicans if the shoe were on the other foot. The president is not to pardon in cases of impeachment would to them mean, if it was a Democratic president, offering a pardon to someone, that the pardon for their criminal activity in Article 3 courts would not be effective. It says the president is not to pardon in cases of impeachment. And that means anybody for any reason, if the president is being impeached. You could nullify his pardons by impeaching him. That's not what it really means, but that's what I would like to say I think it means and make the media tell me I'm wrong, since they're usually so bad at this. Or maybe it's just that they're bad at it for Republicans. That could be the case. All right, well, let's see. Parliamentary law about accusations of impeachment, inception of proceedings in the House, questions of privilege, investigation of charges, procedure of the committee, sort of proceeding in order with the procedural trajectory of common fame as ground for investigation. That's interesting, too. You should keep that in mind when it eventually becomes necessary to impeach Trump on further grounds. That is interesting, though. We have brought that up. And it's everyone's assumption, I think, that the House would be extraordinarily reluctant to impeach Trump on further charges or a second time, even on the same charges or whatever, that they won't want to go through this again, that there would never be a second vote. And ordinarily, I would say that's probably true. However, I do wonder about whether or not Pelosi has sort of, I don't know whether we would say painted herself in a corner about this or she really meant to do things this way, but the language that she's used in the recent past about Trump's actions leaving the House with literally no choice but to do this could provide grounds for actually doing that very unexpected second vote or second round of articles of impeachment. I mean, if you just simply follow the same logic, there's no choice but to go ahead with this. That might really be difficult to get around, for instance. If further information were developed, let's say, I don't know, on the emoluments clause, although that doesn't seem to have bothered a whole lot of people, but all you have to do is wait around for more evidence in the Ukraine case, and you'll find that it's almost impossible to ignore. All right, let's see. I don't see anything under the index in impeachment that looks like that it would pertain to all this. At this point in the procedure, we've moved over to the papers being carried to the Senate, and then rules governing the writ of summons for appearance of the respondent, exhibition and form of articles, parliamentary law as to appearance of respondent. I would think in the Senate there. Requirements of the Senate as to appearance of the respondent, answer, pleadings, examination. There is attendance of the House of Representatives, but that is not the president's attendance in the House, but rather the attendance of the House in the Senate during the trial. And I understand maybe that'll lead us into one of the articles. I really don't think I'm going to find anything all that quickly in the index about that. And I may have to do some scanning of the CRS reports to find out whether it's really true that the president has floor privileges during a vote on articles of impeachment in the House. I find that hard to believe, but it's entirely possible. Let's see. Oh, here's Christine Pelosi commenting just moments ago. There are several procedural shenanigans by the House Republicans to try and delay the inevitable. One thing they refuse to do is proffer Trump and all his aides who participated in what McCarthy's motion just called the Trump-Giuliani scheme to come testify. Interesting. I don't know offhand exactly what McCarthy is up to himself on the floor and all this, but I guess stepping in it left and right. But there is a Politico piece from yesterday that tells us a little bit about what perhaps Republicans have in store, or what Trump would like to see happening in the Senate. Since I mentioned the House's attendance, rules about House members attending the trial in the Senate chamber, the White House is very interested in finding a way for screamers like Jim Jordan to have a formal role when things move over to the Senate. They've enjoyed having him scream on television so much in the House that they would like to see him scream on television in the Senate as well. And he's not a member of the Senate. Now, he was a member of the Judiciary Committee, and he did a lot of yelling there. And they were able to convince the Republican conference in the House to put their weight behind moving him to the Intelligence Committee so that he would be able to scream on camera during their proceedings as well. And so it's entirely possible that they might be able to persuade House Republicans to do what they can to allow him to scream on camera when things move to the Senate. So here's the Politico piece. White House working to feature Trump's House allies in impeachment trial. One idea, the subheader says, is to allow a collection of Republicans to present a minority report and make their case on the Senate floor. This is something they do not ordinarily have the right to do. Filing a minority report along with the reports of the committee with respect to its findings, that of course they have a right to do. But the rules and usual procedure afford only House managers the opportunity to put on the case against the defendant, not the case for the defendant. That is a role offered up to the defendant himself. He can pick and choose, but it doesn't, interestingly, they don't seem to be considering very seriously the idea of having Jim Jordan on the president's defense team, his official defense team. They want to invent a new role that doesn't exist in order to give him a chance to scream. So who's reporting for Politico here? Melanie Zanona, Anita Kumar, and Darren Samuelson. And they have this to say about it. The White House is actively exploring a way to give President Donald Trump's staunchest House allies a public role in the upcoming Senate impeachment trial, according to 5 sources familiar with the matter, as the president looks to mount an aggressive defense in the upper chamber. One idea under consideration is to allow a collection of House Republicans who would be fresh off defending Trump in the House to present a minority report on the Ukraine affair and make their case on the Senate floor, similar to the role Democratic impeachment managers are expected to play in the trial. The idea has been under discussion for several weeks, according to one GOP member familiar with the talks. I don't know who they think they're talking to about that, but I think they just might be talking among themselves. Some of the names in the mix include Representatives Jim Jordan of Ohio, Mark Meadows of North Carolina, and two of Trump's closest allies, as well as Representative John Ratcliffe of Texas, who somehow is in a second category, a former prosecutor, who sits on both the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees, like Jordan, but who somehow didn't become as famous as Jordan. But that would probably depend on a yet-to-be-decided Senate rules package that will set ground rules for the trial, and it's unclear whether enough Senate Republicans would be willing to elevate Trump's fiercest attack dogs to a high-profile role in the proceedings. Many Republican senators have already rebuffed calls from Trump and his allies to haul in controversial witnesses, worried that the trial will become a circus in the usually buttoned-up Senate. I think that's really out the window. That doesn't really apply to the Senate anymore. Another idea is to tap House members for Trump's defense team. That would be the more traditional approach. And by the way, my objection to the first approach of having a minority report be presented, there's no basis whatsoever for bringing what would essentially be a third party into the proceedings here. And of course, this would be a third party presenting on behalf of the president. The president has a defense team. There's no reason to have two defenses for the president and one prosecution. I think most people's conception of a fair trial would mean keeping it even. But then again, most people's perception of a fair trial would include witnesses. It's one of the weaknesses, I think, of the Republican plan to exclude witnesses is that it would occur to people, I don't know how many open-minded, fair people there really are watching the proceedings anymore, but people will pretty quickly, like immediately, figure out that, look, a real trial, we know what they have. They have witnesses. There's a judge, there's a prosecution, there's a defense, and there's witnesses and a jury. We've seen it on crime dramas for years now, and that's not actually the same thing as a legal education. Certainly not the same thing as a education in constitutional law and congressional procedure, but it is a thing that people recognize, and I think we should be playing to that. By the way, that should be part of the Democratic messaging, starting a million years ago and continuing up through the trial. A trial without witnesses is an un-American thing. Even the Soviet show trials had witnesses. They were liars. They were under threat of death to testify as, for instance, Stalin demanded, but there were witnesses. That was the thing, that the one concession that the Soviet kangaroo courts had to make to the rest of the world was, this is what a courtroom proceeding looks like, even in non-Western contexts, and there have to be some witnesses, even if they're liars. To do it without witnesses, I do think it could go unnoticed by a mostly, what do we say, somnambulant American public. Did I get that word right? Well, we'll be back to worry about that in 1 minute. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. How do you like that? That's my smooth jazz radio voice. All right, well, struggling through the morning with the usual frog in the throat today. By the way, thanks to Scott Anderson, who sent along, by way of holiday gifting, a package of Fisherman's Friends cough lozenges, which I think is a thoughtful gift. Given the difficulties I've had. But what it's not a cough that I've got. I'm coughing to try and clear my throat, but what I need is some sort, I don't know what you get for this. I've tried something new today. Maybe it's helping a little bit. I'm just going to start becoming addicted to Mucinex instead. But I don't need a cough suppressant per se. But I am glad to have these Fisherman's Friend cough drops. He tells me in email that everyone hates these cough drops, I guess because they taste terrible, but they really work. I guess fishermen like them, but only, an arm's length friendship, I guess. They recognize the power of the lozenges. But I don't actually need a oral anesthetic, as this is, although I'm sure that I will need them during the winter at some point, so I'm glad to have them, and the thought was quality humor, I will say that, and I like the thought, and it is, after all, what counts. This is what they tell me. All right, so thanks go out there. Let me turn back to the Politico article on what the White House would like to do with Jim Jordan, and it's not what you would think. It's not what I would say, which is throw him in a wood chipper, but they have a different view of what they ought to be doing with him. All right, so as we said, it would be dependent on the yet-to-be-decided Senate rules package. I think it's probably far-fetched, even if the Senate Republicans were inclined to give a role to loudmouth members of the House. They usually don't like to do that. Generally, the Senate is the place where they are the stars, and they don't like to give away starring roles to anybody, particularly people who have A, had those starring roles already for the past several weeks, and B, have their own damn place to do this stuff. So I find it unlikely. But it's also just plain unfair. The idea, right off the bat, that there should be, like I said, two teams of people defending the president, both his official defense team and a special squad from the House versus one squad of House managers managing the impeachment. Makes no sense, but that's not going to necessarily stop them. However, another option is to integrate them into the one team that the defendant is allowed. As it's written here, another idea is to tap House members for Trump's defense team. White House counsel Pat Cipollone is expected to take the lead in the trial, which is, I think, actually relatively unusual. But again, we only have 2 impeachments to go with on that, presidential impeachments. But a person who is close to the president said Trump was still considering who else he wants to add to the team, which could include members of Congress or others outside the White House. I guess he could put whoever he wants on it. And there's been rumors floating, for instance, I'm going to get Alan Dershowitz to be part of the team. I'm going to get, who else? He's come up with a dream team of terrible and discredited lawyers who might agree to represent them. I had joked on Twitter that it was like Dan Snyder, owner of the Washington Breadsticks, was going to be doing his draft for him. A famously poor drafter who is distracted by shiny objects very easily. He's starstruck very often when doing his drafting or making his trades or making deals for attracting players to the team, and he'll go for the biggest, most famousest name as opposed to listening to the coaches who say, this one or that one has more athletic talent, more football talent, or more good productive years left. But Breadsticks fans, if there are any left, will know what I'm talking about when I talk about Dan Snyder. So, what else is possible here? Another former Trump advisor who remains close to the White House, for whatever reason, said Trump wanted to include Jordan and others in his defense, but it's still unclear what role they would take. Pat Cipollone, as much as he has surrendered to the idiocy of the White House, I don't know how amenable he would be to really handing over power or even opportunity at the trial stage to people who are either not lawyers or who are notably terrible lawyers. Cipollone's not great, and he allows himself to be used as cover far too often for a rambling, idiotic president, but he does have, there are things that worry him about entering into something called a trial that his lawyerly side will emerge and maybe hold sway over his ideological side. Anyway, during the trial, senators will be limited in what they can say during the proceedings. Only Trump's defense team and the House Democrats as appearing as impeachment managers. Well, anybody who appears as an impeachment manager can speak, and if a Republican is sent or a former Republican like Justin Amash, they will have the right to speak. It's not that House Democrats are impeaching Donald Trump. The House of Representatives is impeaching Donald Trump. That's important to keep in mind. All right, so only Trump's defense team and the managers will be allowed to substantively debate on the floor. So carving out a role for Trump's top defenders, many of whom have participated in the hearings and closed-door depositions with impeachment witnesses, could be another way to shore up Trump's public defense, or destroy it, depending, which might be especially appealing to the optics-obsessed president, even though the president can't see. There's a lot of discussion going on about that, which is probably a good thing, said Representative Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Probably some of that will be decided over the weekend. Ratcliffe declined to say whether he had been approached about playing a role in the Senate trial. I guess that means he hasn't. And whether he would accept it if asked. But he did acknowledge that, quote, people have talked about whether there's a role for House Republicans to play. I think there are people talking to Trump about that, but I don't know what that is, he said. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the GOP in the Senate will coordinate closely with the White House when it comes to an impeachment strategy, which is awkward and weird. And possibly, out of order. The Kentucky Republican huddled with Cipollone and Eric Ueland, the White House Legislative Affairs Director, just last week. And Meadows, who had a hand in the House GOP's impeachment defense strategy, was also spotted walking into McConnell's office last week. Trump has been fuming both privately and publicly, now very publicly, for weeks that Republicans weren't doing enough to defend him. But that changed after the hearings by the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees began, according to several people familiar with the situation. He was placated with defenses from House members, including from Jordan Meadows, Devin Nunes, Doug Collins, and Elise Stefanik at the hearings and on television. So I guess he really enjoyed that. By the way, I've been thinking that maybe there's a page out of the playbook that could be taken from Elise Stefanik if Democrats, and they won't, but if Democrats got the idea that perhaps, all right, well, this thing is breaking down into a circus regardless, maybe we should think about contributing to the circus rather than sitting patiently with our hands folded, waiting for the Republican circus to end and then picking up. Because you do get the sense sometimes that maybe comporting themselves with decorum in a forum, I didn't mean to rhyme here, comporting themselves with decorum in a forum in which there's no judges, no rule book, no points awarded for doing things by the book versus making a big splash. You wonder whether it's worth considering fighting back or being seen fighting back, even if it will be decried as a circus. And they have legitimate reason to believe, though, that members of the press will watch Republicans behaving badly and just simply dismiss it as that's the way Republicans are. But if Democrats were to respond in kind or even with any indication of a departure from decorum, they would be accused of driving this thing to circus proportions themselves. I don't put it past the press. But I was wondering whether if a rules package were adopted that prohibited calling witnesses at all, whether there might be some value to taking a page out of Elise Stefanik's book, and when House managers are recognized to speak in the Senate proceedings, they immediately move to call witnesses, regardless of the fact that it was adopted as part of the rules package that there would be no witnesses. Now, I don't have any reason to believe that Chief Justice Roberts would overrule the Senate's adopted rules package prohibiting the calling of witnesses. I mean, he would probably rule it out of order and say, well, the rules package, sad as it is, he might leave that unsaid. There are no witnesses in order here, and so I can't allow it. But it might make an interesting show on C-SPAN and whatever other networks are showing the actual proceedings that, look, America expects witnesses to be called in a trial. Once again, sort of playing to their understanding of how trials work from television courtroom dramas. And, if it's not meant to be a real trial, I mean, you might argue, well, it's happening in the Senate and there's 100 members of the jury, so it's not really like a trial where there's only 12 members of a jury. But we are going out of our way to bring in the Chief Justice to preside here. And that might not hit people with the same impact because, of course, they've almost nobody has ever seen an impeachment trial where the president wasn't the one being impeached. It's no accident. They don't actually hold those trials most times on the Senate floor. They hold the trials in the Judiciary Committee when they're impeaching federal judges, for instance, which is still rare but has happened more frequently than the impeachment of presidents. They are allowed by law, a Supreme Court decision on this, in the impeachment of a federal judge, the Nixon case. It's ironic and strange, but not Richard Nixon, but the federal judge, was it Walter Nixon, was impeached, and the Senate, of course, having been awarded the prerogative of being the sole trier of impeachment, decided that it would hold the trial not on the Senate floor, but in the Judiciary Committee. And if all the elements of a trial were present, the Supreme Court said that's up to them where they decide they want to hold it. It's their prerogative. But a presidential impeachment, they've always been done on the Senate floor. And, of course, by rule in the Constitution, the Chief Justice presides there. So if they had had a judicial impeachment on the Senate floor, you would have seen the regular thing that you usually see, a senator from the majority, whichever party that happens to be at the time, would be sitting in the chair as the presiding officer. Or possibly they might have the vice president come in just to lend some additional gravitas to the proceedings. But the Constitution designates the Chief Justice in the case of the president. And why is that the case? Well, there's probably some idea that that would be an impartial decision maker. Of course, he's a judge. I guess we would be generally considered by most people to be the highest judge in the land. So if you're going to put together a proceeding that has a defense and a prosecution and the top judge in the country presiding over it, and senators taking time out before the proceedings to swear themselves in as jurors and call themselves jurors, well, they're going to expect to see things proceed in a familiar fashion. And it might pay off for Democrats to have that moment where they ask to call witnesses and pretend to go about it as though they will be shocked to find out that no witnesses are allowed, and call their first witness, and it would be a name that would probably be recognizable to everyone. And you say, in order to prove our case against the president in our fair and impartial judicial system, we will call the first witness, and you name him, and then you get gavelled down, and they say, no, you can't bring your witness. Well, why not? Well, because the rules say you can't. Well, what about it? Where did these rules come from? How did we get these rules? And could spend some time on the air going over all of that. That's interesting. We're having a trial, and the Republicans, by virtue of the fact that they hold a 3-seat majority in this 100-member body, get to decide what the rules are going to be. And their first decision was to have the very un-American rule that there will be no witnesses allowed. And by the way, you could, of course, be playing up the fact outside of the quasi-courtroom setting that no witnesses is not only the rule that they've adopted here, but the watchword of the mobsters, right? Every time they commit one of their outrageous crimes, they might say to one another, hey, no witnesses, leave no witnesses, shoot them all down, kill them. And that's not exactly what they mean by having no witnesses in the trial, but it's an interesting overlap, and I wouldn't mind confusing people a little bit about that too. It's not beyond me. Anyway, it might be worth trying to do, and maybe even more than once, and saying it's so ridiculous that there can't be witnesses that we would like to highlight this injustice more than once. Let people know that they were fighting to bring witnesses and they were denied by Republicans. The 3-seat majority that they've got. And that would also be a good time to remind everybody of things like how ridiculous our apportionment in the Senate really is, and how many votes there are that are representing nothing but empty prairie lands, essentially. I did see another interesting map circulating yesterday about the number of, the illustration was all of the states highlighted in this map have lower populations than Los Angeles County, California alone. And as it turns out, I think it was 53 states were alleged on this map to actually have lower populations than one county in California, though other people were pointing out later in the thread. Note to self about that one. Find that map. And some were pointing out, well, technically speaking, a few of those states, Georgia and North Carolina, do have populations that now slightly exceed the population of Los Angeles County by not by that much. So Los Angeles County and 10,000 people from elsewhere in California will outweigh North Carolina and Georgia. But another interesting way of illustrating the imbalance of things. There are 53 Republicans in the Senate, yes, but if the popular vote were somehow reflected in the makeup of the Senate in a parliamentary system, there would be nothing like a Republican majority at all. So, all right, let's see. Speaking of the House managers, the thinking yesterday that was presented, or was it the day before, about Justin Amash showing up as a manager. Athena here commenting, if Pelosi picks Amash, I'm going to need some scotch, she says. He was in the Freedom Caucus on the Hill. I think he'll be a poison pill. What do you think? It's an open question, to be sure. It's a risk. But I don't think that he's inclined to do anything that would make it that would undermine the case against Trump. He's been pretty outspoken, but this is a pretty big game, and you don't want to give any part of it away. But at the same time, there would be just tremendous public relations coup that could come from sending this Republican, this former Republican, certainly still conservative member of the House, to it would make it more difficult to portray, even offhandedly, the proceedings as those of House Democrats managing the case and House Democrats impeaching Donald Trump. It would be a good reminder that you have really ought to be thinking about this as the House of Representatives as a whole doing this. All right. Let's see. Another interesting debate currently, I wouldn't say raging, but currently discussed on Twitter now at the moment between Brian Beutler and Josh Barro. The question of whether it makes any sense for the House to adopt the articles of impeachment today, but to delay in some fashion in sending those and dispatching those articles to the Senate for them to begin their trial procedure. Josh Barro asks, reluctantly, I'll credit him with a reasonable question. It is a good question if you stop and think about it. Josh saying, I don't understand the idea here at all, the delay in sending the impeachment articles. Keeping in mind here, I guess he's coming from the position of Donald Trump doesn't want to be impeached. And Republicans in the House, we're watching them currently do everything they can think of to delay the proceedings moving forward. So why would Democrats cooperate in the delay? Of course, it's sort of a different kind of delay and carries a different meaning. So you're conflating the motivations and purpose of two groups that have very different reasons to want delay and to want delay at different points in the process. So it's a little foolish to just equate those two, but I don't know if that's exactly what he's doing here. He's making a very different point. I don't understand the idea here at all. What leverage is Pelosi to have? The threat is if McConnell doesn't give Dems the rules they want, they won't agree to put Trump on trial. And it is a little bit of a stretch. I think Trump, bottom line, would be fine with the idea of the trial never starting because then he could never be removed. But on the other hand, he thinks, most people say and agree, that he can't be removed anyway because the bottom line is because there's more Republicans in the Senate than there are Democrats, and they're not going to be open to evaluating the evidence or doing the right thing. So what do you get out of not beginning a trial and not presenting the evidence against Donald John Trump on television, on national television, in front of the cameras for everybody to watch, even though most people probably won't watch it? And the idea, I guess, like I said, it's a bit of a stretch, is to say, well, the threat exists and he remains under a cloud until this thing happens. And if you think he's going to be acquitted in the end because there are more Republicans in the Senate than there are Democrats, regardless of what the facts say, then the longer it takes, the more, the longer you leave the country in doubt as to whether or not the president would be convicted and removed from office, if you believe there's a fair chance of that happening, then the better the political effects. The president goes into his re-election bid under a cloud, as they say. But he's been under a cloud the whole time. And he's been under a cloud of his pissed orange hair as well. It sits on top of his head, this cloud, every day. So O'Brien, anyway, answers or attempts to answer in this way. Withholding the articles per se is mostly immaterial. The idea, or at least the one with strategic merit, is that she'd delay the trial while expanding the inquiry. The leverage is the possibility that new revelations and articles will tighten the vice that Senate Republicans are in. And that is it's an interesting theory and a legitimate thought and worth consideration. At the same time, it is also said that if you are forced to go ahead with the trial for whatever reason anyway, Brian himself has pointed out, you may end up with a similar tactical or strategic advantage at the end anyway. A quick trial that ends, or relatively quick trial that ends in an acquittal, leaves 11 months between the end of the trial and the and election day 2020 for more information to come out to make Republicans look that much more foolish for having not only voted to acquit but voted to do so quickly and without additional witnesses, when everybody knows that with the passage of time he will just end up looking more and more guilty. But it's difficult to reconcile. And maybe they don't need to be reconciled, and maybe it's just a matter of we'll see what happens. And whatever choice is made, there's probably some tactical advantage at some point to be extracted from it, whatever route you take. But it's a tough call. It's just like it's a tough call what to do with Amash. Does his PR value make it worth the risk? Is there much of a risk? Empty Wheels conclusion, Athena, and I'm sure you heard it on Monday, but if you didn't, maybe you want to go back and go back and take a look or listen to her piece, and maybe I will see if maybe I'll move that back into the active portion of Pocket from the archives, if I did move it to the archives, just so you can see it again. But you know what? Maybe I never even archived it. I think I read it, and wow, I don't even know if I sent it to Scott now that I think about it. But all right, second note to self, Empty Wheels piece, arguing in the Monday show, we read it, why Amash might in fact be trustworthy in all of this, and it was relatively convincing. But basically, he hasn't wavered in his when it's come to issues like ones over which Trump is being impeached. He hasn't wavered whether he was accusing Democrats or Republicans in the Oval Office of exceeding their allotted executive powers. He's also been cooperative on fighting against the expansion of the surveillance state, even when it has put him at odds with his party. And he hasn't shown any sign of wavering in that at any point. So, his track record is pretty good in terms of what to expect about his defection, a surprise defection in the middle of the proceedings if he were a House manager. Okay, let's see. Other items worth bringing up, and gosh, there are a lot of them. Just to get back to, I don't know why I have this from the Jerusalem Post, of all places. But as it happens, it's a Reuters story. You all have seen it in passing. We haven't made note of it yet, and it's right up our alley. Yesterday, and I'm sure there's more recent and thorough reporting, and I'll use the break to try and search some of it up. But Reuters had the first report of this in court yesterday while we were off the air. The lawyers for Lev Parnas apparently have tipped off U.S. federal prosecutors that they know now where the $1 million, yes, $1 million, that somehow landed in accounts under the control of Lev Parnas and his wife, as it turns out, received a $1 million payment from, all they could say earlier in the week was a bank account somehow associated with Russia, an account from a Russian bank, perhaps. But they didn't know who sent it, and I guess prosecutors got wind of who sent it, and guess what? It's exactly who you thought would have sent it, Dmytro Firtash. Isn't that weird? We'll talk about that when we come back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Good news, I took care of some of the housekeeping during the break, and I did get that empty wheel piece and the map I was referring to, the tweet with the map in it, all bookmarked so I can send those on. And you can see them in our roundup when Scott helps prepare it. And I looked for some newer reporting on the $1 million situation, and I had to turn to, well, I've ended up on Mother Jones for this one. But let me read you the Reuters report. As it happens, like I said, I just happened to have the one, for whatever reason, that was carried in the Jerusalem Post. That's what was getting tweeted around. But Reuters, I think, had reporters on hand in the courtroom, and the first couple notes about this little bit of news were simply, here's what I heard in the courtroom, and there wasn't further explanation or a published piece. This was the first published piece I managed to get on this thing. U.S. prosecutors said in court on Tuesday that Lev Parnas, an associate of U.S. President Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, received a $1 million payment from a lawyer for Ukrainian oligarch Dmytro Firtash. So there is a little bit of distance in there in between Dmytro himself and Lev. A couple of pass-throughs here. Prosecutors have said that Parnas, who has been charged with campaign finance violations, should have his bail revoked because he concealed the payment from them. Parnas has denied hiding the payment. The Ukraine-born U.S. citizen was released on bail after his arrest in October and has been living under house arrest in Florida. And despite the fact, by the way, that it is December 18th, and I think the growing season is largely over, it sounds like the lawnmowers and leaf blowers are happening right outside the windows today. Exactly. It's just terrific timing for all of this. Surely there's somewhere else that they could be at this hour. There's lots of leaves everywhere, but they have chosen here. Anyway, I guess, I don't know whether they get around to it in this piece, but I did see reported in some of the later pieces, this amazingly enough, who said it, as a matter of fact? Was it, Talking Points Memo put it right up in the headline of their piece. Despite $1 million from oligarch Firtash, the judge allows Parnas to stay free, which is a really remarkable decision, if you ask me. Remember here that the question is Lev Parnas a good candidate for cash bail here? Because some people thought, maybe he's a flight risk, given the fact, for instance, that he was arrested with at the airport with a one-way ticket to Vienna. That is, a one-way ticket to where Dmytro Firtash is. And keep in mind that during the hearing about whether or not to release him on bail the first time around, in trying to set the bail amount, they said, well, okay, the court usually inquires, for billionaires, you want the bail to be like $100 million. You want that, it needs to be something that you won't be likely to run away from and forfeit. If you flee the country to avoid prosecution, you'd be forfeiting a huge chunk of money. And so they asked Parnas, how much money have you got? And he lied. He told them, very little. I'm very cash poor, which is in some cases thought to be actually to have been true, at least before he got wrapped up in all of this stuff. He was stringing together a bunch of failed businesses, etc. But anyway, he ended up lying to the court and saying, I'm not worth all that much, so that they would give him a low bail amount. And, well, it makes a difference if you have $1 million cash in your wife's bank account when it's time to set bail. And yet, despite this, somehow the judge decided, well, sure, they arrested you with a one-way ticket to the place where the United States is holding Dmytro Firtash under house arrest pending his extradition to the United States for fraud charges. Sure, he's a billionaire. Sure, he's sending you money. Sure, you're lying to the court about how much money you've got and who's giving it to you. But, how about some bail anyway? And I guess they decided to do that. All right. Well, Jerusalem Post has the simple reporting on this, and we just got to get all these pop-ups out of the way so we can read it to you. Last week, prosecutors asked U.S. District Judge Paul Oetken, O-E-T-K-E-N, in Manhattan, to revoke Parnas's bail. They said he had concealed information about his finances, including a $1 million payment he had received from an account in Russia in September. The account into which the payment was deposited was in the name of Parnas's wife, Svetlana Parnas, government and defense lawyers said. Now, I'm just going to pause here for a second. One, to listen to the leaf blowers, the sweet melody. Hear that? Of the leaf blowers. Thanks, guys. They just don't know what's going on in here. If they knew, they'd probably have more leaf blowers to try to drown me out. It's a plot by, I don't know who. Anyway, again, the money came from Firtash, although it was passed through a couple of other places here, but it ends up in Parnas's wife's account. Why is that interesting? Well, by itself, it would make you say, oh, they put the money in the wife's account so that Lev Parnas could say, I don't have $1 million. And if they caught him, then he would say, oh, well, you mean, I have no $1 million. Oh, you mean this $1 million, right? You mean this gate key. That's my wife's $1 million. She's got the account. I thought you were asking me if I had $1 million, and I don't. So there's that dodge. There's the possibility that they never find out about it, and Lev just has Svetlana pay all the bills from now on, whatever. But I pause because it's of some interest here. We all understand the dodge of putting it in the wife's account, and we all know that that's not supposed to work. But there's more interest, I think, to this, which is Devin Nunes. Remember him? He was in the news a couple of days ago. But do you remember when Devin Nunes, and we have to phrase this carefully, remember when it became public knowledge, thanks to the investigators at the Intelligence Committee, that Lev Parnas's phone records indicated that he had had some phone conversations in April of this year with Devin Nunes. And it was, it was rather scandalous to find out that this was the case, and made us wonder whether Devin Nunes was in on the whole thing from the beginning and had disclosed to no one that he was in contact with Lev Parnas at a time when no one had heard of Lev Parnas. And maybe he ought to be a fact witness in this whole proceeding and not, in fact, presiding on behalf of Republicans over any of this, much less the Intelligence Committee's inquiry into Trump's activities. But and then there was the mini flap of Republicans trying to make out that, oh my God, it's a terrible breach of protocol. Adam Schiff has subpoenaed Devin Nunes' phone records. And of course, they kept going with that, and some people in the media made it all too easy for them to continue with that. But of course, the phone records subpoenaed were those of Lev Parnas, and it's not Devin Nunes. And just happens to be Devin Nunes's bad luck that he was criminally conspiring with Lev Parnas over the telephone and ended up getting caught. It wasn't that they went and looked for Devin Nunes's records. It's that Devin Nunes kept showing up at the scene of various crimes of his own volition. Anyway, Nunes, by way of defense somehow, he thought he was going to get himself out of trouble by saying, well, okay, I can see that the numbers are there, and I can't think of a way to... I mean, I guess most Republicans at this point would be quicker on their feet and would say, oh, that's a fake call, or it was a butt dial. I butt dialed Lev Parnas, or Lev Parnas butt dialed me, or that's a fake. The phone records have been forged to frame me, or something like that. Boy, they're really parked close outside the window, aren't they? Okay, well, anyway... it's very distracting, as a matter of fact. But his dodge here was, the one he opted to go with instead was, oh, yeah, well, first of all, I got that call and I didn't recognize who it was, so I gave it to my staff. So I don't know that I ever spoke to Parnas or anybody else. I think I handed it off. Second of all, I think that phone number is actually Lev Parnas' wife, not Lev Parnas. Well, now we know why I'm pausing on that again. Well, first of all, what the hell are you doing with Lev Parnas' wife's phone number in your phone? Second of all, what the hell are you doing with Lev Parnas' wife's phone number committed to memory? Since I didn't know who it was, so I gave it to staff. But now that I think about it, I think it was Lev Parnas. No, it was Lev Parnas' wife. I know the difference by sight between Lev Parnas' cell phone number and Lev Parnas' wife's cell phone number. That's actually not exculpatory evidence. But now, of course, what you're saying is, I know you thought that was a great dodge a couple of days ago, but like Brian Beutler was saying about a slightly different angle on things, you never know what's going to emerge in the evidence as days go on. So it probably wasn't in Devin Nunes' mind that within a couple of days it would turn out that Lev Parnas' wife's phone number being in your phone, or your phone number being in her phone records, or what have you. And I guess, by the way, I mean, does that whole story fall apart if it was in fact Lev Parnas' phone records that were being subpoenaed, or were the investigators at the Intel Committee thorough enough to know to ask for Lev Parnas and Lev Parnas' wife's phone numbers? All cell phones held by this household. That I don't know. But the dodge of it being, well, it's not Lev Parnas, it's Lev Parnas' wife, doesn't look that good once you find out that it was Lev Parnas' wife who had, technically, control of the millions of dollars that were possibly being sent from Firtash or other Russian accounts and funneled through to Lev Parnas. They weren't there yet, but it's just odd that that excuse now falls apart and actually ends up looking worse for Nunes. Yes, I was calling a Parnas, but no, it wasn't Lev, it was his wife, who's innocent. Oh, you mean the one who was getting $1 million payments from Dmitro Firtash, and is therefore probably not that innocent? I'll get back to you on that. So, speaking of getting back to you, back to the Jerusalem Post here. On Tuesday, U.S. Attorney Rebecca Donaleski said that the source of the payment was Firtash's lawyer. So there is a little bit of a... there's an additional layer of complication here. But I mean, Firtash's lawyer, just like any other lawyer, is not going to pass on $1 million without Firtash saying, yes, please do that. She said, that is, the U.S. attorney said, it was not plausible that the payment was a loan to Parnas' wife, as he, Firtash, and his lawyer had said. A lawyer for Parnas, Joseph Bondi, we remember him, identified the Firtash attorney in court as a Swiss national, Ralph Oswald Eisenegger. Oswald is a terrible name to have when you're involved in a conspiracy, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. Firtash, one of Ukraine's wealthiest businessmen, is fighting extradition by U.S. authorities on bribery charges from Vienna, where he has lived for 5 years. And I'd like to just reiterate that again and emphasize once again that in the middle of all this, Firtash is wanted in the United States of America and is fighting extradition by Trump's own Department of Justice, and Vicky Tensing and Joe DeGeneva are the ones helping him do that, fight Trump's DOJ. which is pretty amazing. And if he was really interested, of course, in combating fraud in Ukraine, then he would, and corruption in Ukraine, and he'd be very interested personally in having Firtash's case wound up and have his butt hauled right back here for trial. But somehow he's not interested in that anymore, and it's weird. And also that this guy who is at the heart of Ukrainian corruption is sending $1 million to Lev Parnas's wife. Why? What's Lev Parnas doing for him? At most, he's supposedly translating for DeGeneva and Tensing in their defense of this wanted criminal. Now, wanted criminals are entitled to a defense, of course, but it is odd that the case ends up breaking down along these lines. Firtash's spokesman could not immediately be reached for comment. Bondi said in a court filing on Monday that the $1 million payment was in fact disclosed. He said, because that's not really good for his client, he said in court that Parnas has absolutely no continuing relationship with Mr. Firtash. Mr. Parnas has completely burned those bridges. That's interesting. So, I mean, if the claim was that at any point that it was a loan, then, well, you've got a continuing relationship with him. You might try and escape it, but you'll be eating a polonium hamburger sometime soon if you do that. Parnas was charged alongside another Florida businessman, Belarus-born Igor Fruman. Oh, I didn't realize he was from Belarus. I thought he was always being portrayed as Ukrainian. But maybe we're up to speed now on that. Charged alongside Igor Fruman with illegally funneling money to a pro-Trump election committee and other politicians. Fruman and Parnas have pleaded not guilty. But, of course, now we have some questions about, well, where did that money come from? And the answer is, the point of these stories is, it's exactly what you thought it was from day one. When you found out, hey, Parnas and Fruman have been getting a hold of some weird unexplained funds. Where might they be coming from? We were able to say, well, you know, Dmitro Firtash. We know where that's coming from. That it's inferred in all these articles, but it's never proven and stated outright. So, you know, you could object along the way. Well, you don't know that for a certainty, and that's good lawyering. But as it turns out, yeah, that's where it came from. Dmitro Firtash, just like you thought. So, Mother Jones expands on this. Dan Friedman reporting for them. Indicted Ukrainian oligarch paid $1 million to Giuliani pal, prosecutors say. Let's see if there's any additional detail worth discovering in this one. Let's see. Ukrainian oligarch Dmitry Firtash paid $1 million to Lev Parnas. We know who he is. We know how that came up. Firtash, a natural gas mogul with Kremlin connections, lives in Vienna. Well, that's one way of putting it. He's holed up in Vienna under house arrest because he can't leave Vienna because of the proceedings against him while he's fighting extradition to the United States, where he faces bribery charges. Tuesday's revelation suggests that Firtash's efforts to win help from the associates of President Donald Trump to avoid extradition are more extensive than previously known. It also raises new questions about how exactly Firtash's legal troubles intersect with Trump's Ukraine scandal, an ongoing controversy in which Giuliani, Parnas, and Firtash's American attorneys feature prominently. The news came amid sparring over whether Parnas, who's charged with violating campaign finance laws, should have his bail revoked. Prosecutors allege that Parnas lied about his finances by concealing this money. Prosecutors said that Firtash was the source of the money. It wasn't immediately clear when Firtash provided the funds or what specifically the payment was for. Parnas' lawyer, Joseph Bondi, argued that the $1 million was a loan. Bondi did not respond to requests for inquiries on Tuesday. Prosecutors have also said that Parnas tried to mislead them about $200,000 that he was paid between August and October by a law firm representing Firtash. That's DeGeneva and Tensing. And, of course, they are, in case you forgot, husband and wife legal team that regularly appears on Fox News to attack Trump's critics. They have said that they paid Parnas for translation work in connection to their work for Firtash. A spokesman for the couple did not respond to questions. Bondi, Parnas' lawyer, said that Parnas earlier this year offered to help Firtash with his legal problems if Firtash hired Tensing and DeGeneva. Bondi told the New York Times that Parnas encouraged Firtash to help dig up dirt on Democrats as part of any potential resolution to his extradition matter. Tensing and DeGeneva obtained a personal meeting in late August with Attorney General William Barr and pressed for the DOJ to drop its case against their client. They have not succeeded in winning over Barr so far. Firtash told the Times late last month that he has paid Tensing and DeGeneva $1.2 million to date, with a portion set aside as a referral fee for Parnas. Mother Jones and other publications had previously reported that Parnas and his associate Fruman told various people earlier this year that they were being paid by Firtash. So there you go. And now they know it's true. And Firtash told the Times that he paid the men's travel expenses while considering a deal they pitched him to sell American liquefied natural gas to Ukraine. So again, once again, I go back to the cover story of Fruman being there as a translator. He's not. He's being paid. Translator is innocuous sounding job, but he's the messenger between Firtash and parties unknown, and in addition, trying to do business for himself on the side while he's there. Back to Mother Jones, $1 million seems unlikely to be a mere travel expense. And the revelation of the payment suggests that Firtash's efforts to win favor with Americans close to Trump went further than previously reported. We don't know who else he's paid and how much, right? Using funds with unexplained origins, Parnas and Fruman, since 2018, provided more than $500,000 in political contributions to support Trump and other Republicans, including Kevin McCarthy, by the way. The allegations against them include making illegal donations to U.S. politicians, including former member of Congress Pete Sessions. According to federal prosecutors, Parnas sought Sessions' assistance in helping remove or recall Marie Yovanovitch, who was at the time ambassador to Ukraine. In public statements, Giuliani has acknowledged that he focused on forcing Yovanovitch's removal because he feared she would complicate his efforts to force President Zelensky to launch investigations aimed at helping Trump politically. That was the big news yesterday. I believed that I needed Yovanovitch out of the way, Giuliani amazingly told The New Yorker in an article posted Monday. She was going to make the investigations difficult for everybody because she knew that they were bogus from the start. So once again, another example of Giuliani confessing to these things under no duress at all, for whatever reason. Let me take a look quickly at TPM's reporting on this, because they're focusing on the bail issue. Despite $1 million from oligarch Firtash, judge allows Parnas to stay free, reports Josh Kovensky at TPM. A Swiss lawyer for Ukrainian billionaire gas middleman Dmytro Firtash wired $1 million to Rudy Giuliani associate Lev Parnas' wife in September of 2019. Prosecutors and an attorney for Parnas said on Tuesday. The revelation came in a hearing where a Manhattan federal judge denied a request from the government to revoke Parnas' bail agreement after prosecutors accused him of concealing the loan along with other financial information. The denial left Parnas' previous bail package unchanged. District Judge Paul Oetken for the SDNY said he recognized that there was a serious risk of flight, but found that the strict conditions that exist are appropriate. The Assistant U.S. Attorney, Rebecca Donaleski, said Parnas poses an extraordinary risk of flight during the hearing, and that he had reported and unreported connections to the highest levels of government in Ukraine. She repeatedly referred to the $1 million transfer as income, saying that it had been papered over as an unsecured loan in a manner typical of money laundering from Eastern Europe into the United States. So the pattern's familiar. Parnas' attorney, Joe Bondi, said that the $1 million was an unsecured loan from a Swiss lawyer named Ralph Oswald Eisenegger. That seems unlikely. Bondi told the court that he did not pretend to understand how the extremely wealthy do their business. Ah, I see. Who can question these fellows? Bondi said that Eisenegger had demanded Svetlana Parnas return the money after prosecutors raised it in court filings. Donaleski said that the government only became aware of the $1 million from Firtash the day after agreeing to Parnas' bail package. She said that her office immediately subpoenaed bank records for the transaction upon learning about it. Bondi conceded that the $1 million was loosely papered. Firtash has been stranded in Vienna since 2014 after a U.S. federal indictment on charges of foreign bribery was unsealed. Prosecutors have referred to him as an upper echelon member of the Russian mafia in court papers, while petitions for his extradition to the U.S. have stalled over the past 5 years. Yes, by the way, he has been charged, believe it or not, under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, about which we learned so much yesterday in reading through the Just Security Compendium. Let's see, is there anything more? Some interesting detail here, and since I was thinking of possibly going back to that Just Security article and finishing the last two sections, but we'll save that for another day as we're nearly out of time here. And this still seems interesting. Bondi added that Parnas had burned the bridge between Firtash and himself by extension with the law firm of DeGeneva and Tensing. The two Trump world attorneys will no longer speak with Parnas, Bondi averred. The hearing featured detailed wrangling over Parnas's financial status and over whether or not he and his attorney intentionally lied to the government. At one point, Donaleski suggested that Bondi lied to the court in saying that Parnas had only $94,000 left in his bank account. I'd like to have that. Parnas, quote, hired armed security to take his children to school, Donaleski said, adding, who's paying for that? Though $94,000 would do it. Even now, the government isn't clear about the state of his finances, Donaleski added. Judge Odkin also questioned how Parnas had drained the $1 million to his wife in September to $94,000 in December, telling Bondi, I know you're expensive, but not that expensive. Separately, prosecutors had accused Parnas's counsel of lying to a South Florida pretrial services officer. Odkin said that he had spoken with the officer in question and agreed with prosecutors. So Parnas and Parnas's counsel being accused of lying fairly frequently does some damage to his credibility as a witness, which he's offered himself up as in the impeachment proceedings. So proceed with caution with that guy. Anyway, he thought you were spinning it a particular way, Odkin told Bondi, adding, you do need to be careful in relaying what the court has said. Donaleski had said that it was a close call that Parnas did not succeed in fleeing, arguing that the bail's purpose, bankrupting his family if he fled, was mooted by the Giuliani associates' alleged dissembling. But Odkin narrowed the issue in his ruling and focused on what had changed since the government agreed to Parnas's bail package in October. The judge said that at the end of the 2-hour hearing that although the prosecutors had presented concerning and suspicious information, he was not sure if it rises to the level of revoking Parnas's bail. I guess we'll find out. Donaleski had argued that Parnas repeatedly went close to the line without crossing it in his misstatements, but that the aggregate amount of alleged dissembling suggested that the Giuliani associate was intentionally misleading the court. Odkin, in his ruling, said that while Parnas had violated the spirit of the law, there was no clear direct misstatement that he could identify. Prosecutors accused Parnas last week of lying to the government about his finances and of telling his pretrial services officer that the judge had already loosened his conditions of release. Specifically, Manhattan federal prosecutors said that Parnas had concealed the source of the September 2019 wire transfer and suggested that he had downplayed the size of his wealth in order to get a lighter bail package. Through his attorneys, Parnas contested the claims in a Monday filing. He said that the issue with his pretrial services officer was a misunderstanding and that any errors in his financial disclosures to the government were accidental or due to the fact that his assets were registered with his wife. Parnas was indicted in October, as you know, on campaign finance charges, along with Igor Fruman. That, no surprise. Then again, noting that he was arrested on the jetway at Dulles as they were getting ready to head off to Vienna. And Manhattan federal prosecutors are reportedly examining Giuliani's financial activities and ties to Parnas and Fruman in a criminal inquiry. They have also indicated that additional charges against Parnas and Fruman are likely. And we'll leave it there for now because we are, in fact, out of time. That terrible excuse that we don't allow other journalists to avail themselves of. But wrapping up for the day and heading on out the door. It is only Wednesday, so we do have Thursday and Friday left to go. We hopefully will get back to that Just Security compendium, and it's not too late, even though they'll be voting on those articles of impeachment, presumably today, but I think we've set that up pretty nicely. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and why don't I start now on what he's got in store for you so we can get all the way through it. Starting off, and we'll give all the embellishments here in the Bistro Cafe. There is a reason GOP leadership is so afraid of who? Lev Parnas. Should they be? We'll find out. Then, on the rest of the menu, Elaine Chao is under scrutiny for a $67 million grant to her husband's home state. She should be under scrutiny for that. An anti-gay Texas judge sued the state for telling her she must do her job. And Congress is restricting Trump's ability to pull the U.S. out of NATO. That seems like a good idea. And after his break, he'll move on to the chef's table, where the European rights watchdog said Greece needs to do more to counter bribery. And veteran climbers are skeptical that Nepal's new rules for Everest will address the root causes of the heavy death toll on the world's tallest peak. All that and much more
from Daily
coming up
Co's
next.
Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
You have. And I should have waited for this to say that all that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef de Cuisine, Justice Putnam. And for months, I've been unable to get all the way through the fantastic and detailed announcements that Justice provides for us on our way out the door. So I'm glad to have been able to do that service for him today. We'll see you tomorrow.